friends, and welcome back to 155 Books. My name is Shannon and today I'm going to be sharing with you 3 of my recent 5-star reads. So I have realised I actually only like talking about books when I've enjoyed them, so I'm going to throw wrap-ups or the idea of even doing wrap-ups again on my channel out the window. I don't really like doing recent reads either because again it's just all of the books you've read recently, and instead every now and again I'm going to do a video just dedicated to recent 5-star or even sometimes 4-star books that I've read recently that I really enjoyed. The 3 that I've got to share with you today is actually a kind of mixed bag, but without further ado I'm just going to get straight into it. And the first book I want to talk about today is The Myth of Normal, Trauma, Illness and Healing in a Toxic Culture by Gabor Mate, with Daniel Mate, who is his son, who helped him sort of collate and write parts of this book as well. So Gabor Mate is a doctor. He has written other books other than this one, but this one kind of delves into this idea of how trauma can cause illness in the body later on in life, or even in the present moment sometimes. There's sort of 3 main themes to this. So it's sort of like the idea of the mind body as one. So for example, what I just said about trauma showing up as physical illness later on in life. There is quite a few chapters sort of showing examples of this happening, and this kind of like want and push by Gabor Mate to change the medical profession from being a profession that solely focuses on the physical body and also starts to incorporate the mind body as well, and starting asking patients about their past traumas and see how that can actually help with the diagnosis and treatment of patients. And like I say, there's examples given. It is fascinating. I have said this in a previous video. Before picking this up, I would definitely check out the content warnings, because there are, especially in the earlier chapters, a lot of stories about people's past traumas that is quite difficult to read. So I would definitely, like I say, check out the content warnings before picking this up. The second sort of theme in this book that I wasn't really expecting while picking it up, but it does actually kind of explain it in the title. But Gabor Mate goes into great detail about how the society we live in today is technically breeding us into having problems and causing illnesses. It's very difficult to explain that simply, but it's sort of like the idea that the society we live in is toxic enough to the point where it is harming our bodies. For example, there was an entire chapter on childbirth and how the society we live in treats women who are pregnant as if they're ill, and the whole idea of childbirth as this thing of so many things could go wrong, therefore you're ill, and it has to be done in a really sort of dramatic, scary way. And this idea that because of the way we treat pregnant women and where they give birth in these horrible hospitals with terrifying sounds, horrible lighting, just a very unsafe kind of atmosphere, that in turn creates a lot of the issues that are now prevalent in childbirth. And it just blew my mind. But that is just one example of like the toxicities of our culture and how it is causing problems for, like I say, our physical bodies. There are several chapters in here that delve into great detail, and like I say, it was fascinating but also terrifying, because a lot of the time it's embedded in society. It's things that as an individual you cannot change, you have no choice over, and that is scary. And that leads me on to the final part of the sort of themes in this book, and that is obviously the healing side of things. I was very grateful that there was a healing chapter, because without that I think this book would have been a lot of heavy discussions to sort of digest. I would say personally I kind of didn't enjoy the healing chapters as much as I wanted to, but I think that's because I have knowledge of the healing practices that were mentioned in this book from a previous book that I've read, and that is the idea of limiting beliefs and how you can sort of like heal your past traumas through limiting beliefs and sort of like journaling exercises and things like that. That is not to say that I didn't write 6 A4 pages of like nonsense, but helping nonsense, when I did do the like written healing exercises in this, so it was still incredibly helpful, but like I said, I was expecting a little bit more, some maybe new information that I didn't really get from the healing chapters. But overall, this was a fascinating read. I really enjoyed it. I ended up giving it 4 stars, but yes, one that I'm very glad I picked up and read, and one that I would recommend, but like I say, make sure you check out the content warnings first. So this next book is one that I'm so glad I picked up and enjoyed, because it's given me that little glimmer of hope when it comes to myth retellings. Of course, the book I'm talking about is Medusa by Jessie Burton, so this massively deserves the hype it gets. And like I say, it's given me that glimmer of hope again for myth retellings, because I'm very hit and miss when it comes to myth retellings. I think I've realised I prefer the shorter ones to the longer ones. So this one is of course a retelling of Medusa and Medusa's story, but it's kind of from a perspective that Perseus turns up at the island she is on after obviously she's been exiled, and they kind of have like a kind of connection and a little bit of a romance before the inevitable ending. So there were a few things that I really enjoyed about this. Firstly is the writing, because it is a sort of young adult kind of version. I thought it would be very simple, which it is, but that doesn't, like I say, take away from the writing. It's still written beautifully, as well as that it's the sort of feminist aspect of the retelling of this story, which is kind of what you get in a lot of the myth retellings these days. But for this one for me was done so well, to the point where I have tabbed it continuously all the way through, because there were so many amazing passages that I even resonated with myself. And I think that just shows how well this retelling has been done, that if, as a woman in the modern day, can relate to a myth retelling, then you know, you're doing something right. I also feel like I read this at the perfect time, because there was also this kind of idea with Medusa of this like sense of self, and how her sense of self had been taken away from her because of the way she's been treated by men throughout her life. And yeah, it's just something that I personally have been struggling with recently, is this idea and concept of my sense of self. So, bloody airplanes. So it was really great to connect to Medusa sort of in that kind of personal way. And the only way I can really explain it, it was like I was talking to a friend, I guess, about what I'd been going through and getting some really good advice just by reading this book. So yes, that's why I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. I can see why everyone loves it so much. I would highly recommend it. And it has got me really excited, like I say, again, about myth retellings, and I do want to try some more, because I did really enjoy this one. And last but not least is probably my favourite book that I've read of the year so far. It's another kind of retelling, I guess, but I'm so glad I bought this, and I'm so glad I read it, because it was wild, and I cannot wait to talk about this book. But it's also really exciting because it's one that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about. I got the recommendation from Julia from Shakespeare and Such, but the book I'm talking about is Enter the Body by Joy McCullough. So this is obviously a kind of Shakespeare retelling, but what it does is just like mind-blowing for me. The concept is just amazing and I love it. So essentially it's kind of like the trap door of the female characters in Shakespeare plays after they've like come off stage, i.e. died, mainly the main 3 that it talks about, because they all get killed, and it's them sort of discussing their own story with each other and then retelling their own story, and it's just done in such an amazing way. I loved it. So the 3 main Shakespeare characters it does follow is Juliet from Romeo and Juliet, Ophelia from Hamlet, and Cordelia from King Lear. And I've always loved Cordelia. I can't really explain why, because King Lear is probably one of my least favourite tragedies. No, it is my least favourite tragedy. But I've always had this, like, I don't know, I think it's because her story is so tragic, and this book just, like, confirmed how much I love Cordelia. It was just, I'm speechless. It was so good. Another thing that I felt really added to the story is, like I say, the way it's told, but when Ophelia, Juliet and Cordelia tell their own stories to each other, it's written in a sort of like verse format, so I sped through it. There's also sort of like discussion on the fact that like one of the characters tells her story in a specific way. There's also other female Shakespeare characters in this that are also in the trap room that don't really talk. So Lavinia from Titus Andronicus, and like I say, reading this has made me want to read that book so badly, so badly. Cordelia's sisters, Regan and Goneril, are also in this, but again, they don't talk, but there is mention of them. There was just so many things. Like, I cannot wait to reread this to just dissect it. The only thing I would say that initially I felt a little bit let down by is when they are telling their own stories to each other at the beginning in the first part. I kind of thought, oh, well, this is a bit boring because they're just telling a story that I already know. But like I say, they go back and retell their story in a way that, like, oh, actually, this is how I would have wanted it to go. I've read some reviews about this, and a lot of people there was one thing that maybe they didn't really like about it in the way the girls do retell their stories. It's maybe not in the way that you would think it would be, but for me, that's what made it so good, because there's one big main thing or theme when it comes to these women in Shakespeare plays, is that they don't know any better. Like, it's difficult for them to reimagine their story or retell their story in such a opposite way when this is all they've known, if that makes sense. So that really shone through for me and was like a gut punch. And yes, at the end I cried my eyes out. It was like someone had stabbed me, punched me in the gut. Like I say, reading this was wild, and I really, really, really enjoyed it. And of course, like I've kind of already expressed, this is a very sort of feminist retelling, of course, because it's following the women from Shakespeare plays, but a lot of the themes, like I say, are very feminist themes that, again, as a modern day woman, I can still relate to some of those things. It is one, again, that I would check the content warnings for, because there are some kind of descriptions of some things that do happen to these women in Shakespeare plays, which are not very nice to read about. But overall, blown away by this, and I really want to talk to someone about it because it was insane. So those are some of my recent 4/5 star reads. Please let me know in the comments what book you last gave 5 stars, and thank you guys so much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you again soon. Bye.